Okay, let's dive right into this. Have you ever wondered if the terrifying stories our ancestors told around the campfire were, well, more than just stories? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to uncover the fascinating, real-world science and history hiding right behind our most terrifying legends. Seriously, think about it for a second. What if the monsters hiding in the dark were actually real? For centuries, we've shared epic tales of beasts and heroes, and it's so easy for us in the modern world to just assume they were campfire stories, right? Just woven out of thin air to entertain or frighten folks on a dark night. But Frances Charles, the chairwoman of the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, hit the nail on the head when she said this story is not a myth. And you know what? She was absolutely right. Recent geological studies actually proved that massive, devastating Pacific tsunamis struck her tribe's village 5 separate times over the centuries. Their oral history, passed down through generations around the fire, wasn't some fairy tale. It was a highly precise, scientifically accurate record of literal natural disasters. Section 1. The Roots of Legends. Now, what's really wild about this is how many of our ancient legends are actually just misunderstood biology and geology. Our ancestors were simply trying to make sense of a wild, untamed world. And this brings us right to the whole concept of cryptids. Basically, a cryptid is an animal whose existence is disputed or just completely unsubstantiated by science. It was the whisper of these mysterious, hidden creatures that drove intrepid explorers out into the unforgiving wilderness for centuries, literally desperate to find proof. Section 2. Terrors of the Deep. Let's plunge into the ocean depths, an environment that is basically built for mystery. We'll start with a beast that has terrified Viking seafarers since all the way back in the 13th century. The Old Norse word krake inspired these terrifying tales of colossal, ship-crushing monsters pulling entire vessels down into the abyss. But the biological reality? It turns out the kraken was actually the giant squid. This is an elusive deep-sea dweller that can measure up to a staggering 43 feet long. I mean, early sailors simply didn't know what they were looking at. Out on the isolated ocean, fear dramatically magnified what they saw. And the kraken definitely isn't alone here. What about those massive, terrifying sea serpents you always see drawn on old nautical maps? Well, experts actually believe these sightings might be explained by the giant oarfish. Imagine a bony, ribbon-like fish growing up to 26 feet long, swimming completely vertically through the dark water. And even crazier, they're deep ocean dwellers thought to be driven to the surface during seismic events, like underwater earthquakes. So those monstrous serpent sightings, they might have actually been real-life biological warnings of impending tectonic activity? Okay, get this. Even mermaids have a scientific explanation. Back in 1493, Christopher Columbus actually reported seeing mermaids while sailing near the Dominican Republic, but he curiously noted they had masculine traits. Well, it turns out a lonely, exhausted crew suffering from scurvy, which is a severe vitamin deficiency that can literally induce vivid hallucinations, likely mistook marine mammals like manatees and dugongs for beautiful aquatic humans. They even stand on their tails sometimes, bobbing just above the waterline. For a desperate sailor, that creates a remarkably convincing human silhouette. Section 3. Beasts on the Land. So that brilliantly illustrates how extreme conditions and isolation played tricks on the human mind out on the water. But the myths of the land? They are equally fascinating. Take the terrifying Minotaur from Greek mythology. The earliest versions of the story didn't even mention a half-man, half-bull monster pacing in a maze. It was simply a rage-filled beast roaring deep underground, causing sheer destruction above. The reality here is that the island of Crete sits right above the highly active Aegean tectonic plate, so that roaring beast was actually ancient man's very practical, incredibly poetic way of explaining the devastating earthquakes rocking the very foundations of their world. Meanwhile, about 2,000 years ago, Scythian gold miners trekking through the harsh, windswept expanses of the Gobi Desert were digging when they uncovered something absolutely incredible: the massive fossilized bones of a beaked dinosaur called a Protoceratops. Now, they had absolutely no concept of dinosaurs, right? So their imaginations had to fill in the massive gaps. Looking at this powerful beaked skeleton right next to their gold veins, these ancient bones literally gave birth to the legendary griffin, a majestic, winged beast, perfectly designed by the human mind to fiercely guard hidden desert treasures. And it doesn't stop there. Even our most famous Gothic monsters, vampires, are rooted in a deeply tragic reality. Long before we understood modern medicine and microbiology, the terrifying symptoms of very real wasting diseases were immediately blamed on the supernatural. Take the condition porphyria, for instance. It causes severe light sensitivity and intense gum deterioration, literally making a person's teeth look like elongated fangs. Then you have tuberculosis, which causes painfully pale skin and coughing up blood around the mouth. Throw in a complete lack of understanding of natural human decomposition in graveyards, and you've got the perfect, devastating recipe for a massive vampire panic. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. If all these terrifying monsters have incredibly grounded roots in biology, paleontology, and geology, well, it begs a massive question. What if the epic stories aren't just about monsters? What if the greatest legends in human history are actually about real wars and real people? Section 4. History hidden in epics. Let's dive into the greatest epic poem in history, Homer's Iliad. For a long time, the epic siege of the Trojan War was considered pure, fabricated myth. That is, until archaeologists started digging at a mound in northwest Turkey and realized, wow, they were actually uncovering the towering, burned ruins of the real Troy. But untangling the actual historical timeline of these epics is incredibly tricky. The events Homer describes, with their bronze weapons and chariot warfare, sound a whole lot like the late Bronze Age, around 1600 to 1200 BC. But the poems themselves were composed much later, around 700 BC during the early Iron Age. Homer was essentially mashing entirely different historical eras together into one imagined, magnificent, heroic age. Just look at the incredible siege Triton. This is a beautiful, intricately carved silver vessel found at Mycenae that dates all the way back to 1600 BC. The artwork on this piece clearly shows a dynamically besieged coastal city. This artifact is a total historical revelation because it proves that a dramatic, culturally defining siege narrative was already a massive part of Aegean culture centuries before the accepted date of the Trojan War even happened. Yet when Homer famously describes his heroes fighting and falling on the battlefield, the historical details get remarkably muddy. The heavy iron tools and specific cremation practices he vividly describes, those didn't actually exist in the Bronze Age. They matched the Iron Age, his own time period. Why? Because Homer was trying to create the ultimate legendary warrior for his audience. The Homeric hero is actually a historical composite. He's masterfully woven from multiple fragmented timelines, ancient ruins, and modern artifacts to create an ideal warrior that felt both ancient and fiercely relevant to the listeners. Section 5. When Myths Are Hoaxes. Now, while our ancient ancestors were making incredibly earnest attempts to understand a terrifying, mysterious world through their stories, we do have to acknowledge the other side of the coin here. Deliberate fabrications. Because let's face it, modern man absolutely loves a prank. It's fascinating to see how this builds a legacy of rapid-fire modern hoaxes. I'm talking about Ray Wallace using carved wooden feet to stomp out giant Bigfoot prints in the mud in 1958. Or how about a literal mummified monkey stitched onto the tail of a fish to create P.T. Barnum's famous Fiji mermaid in 1822. We also have the iconic Loch Ness Monster photo, which was completely debunked as just a plastic head mounted on a toy submarine, and the Cottingley fairies, which were literal paper cutouts from a children's book carefully propped up in a garden. Section 6. The truth behind tales. So why does all of this actually matter, and what should you take away from this explainer today? The crucial point is this. Fiction is rarely woven entirely out of thin air. When faced with a terrifying unknown, our ancestors simply used vivid, mythological language to document their reality. They didn't have the sophisticated scientific vocabulary for 43-foot deep-sea squids, or ancient dinosaur fossils weathering out of the desert sand, or shifting tectonic plates causing the earth to violently shake. So instead, they gave us krakens, griffins, and minotaurs. Modern science isn't destroying these cherished myths, it's actually revealing the absolutely incredible hidden truths behind them. In our search for the unknown, it is far from over. Our planet is still filled with wild frontiers. As ocean researcher Edie Witter so brilliantly points out, we really have only explored 5% of the ocean. What about the stuff that doesn't float when it dies? Just think about that. There is an astonishing amount of life out there, lurking in the deepest trenches that we simply haven't even seen yet. Which leaves us with one final thrilling thought to ponder. If we've really only explored a tiny fraction of our world, and so many of our oldest, most impossible legends turned out to be firmly based in scientific reality, what other terrifying myths are just waiting in the dark to be proven true? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the unknown.